Ghostly tales, yet mirrors of human life. Hey, everyone! Welcome to Encountering Chinese. Ghostly Tales from Liao Zhai. Today, I'm going to tell you a story called Jiao Na. In traditional Chinese culture, it was believed that small animals, after undergoing long periods of spiritual cultivation, could transform into human beings. These transformed beings not only possessed human-like thoughts but also exhibited human-like behaviors. However, the process of their transformation was arduous, and because transforming into human form defied natural laws, they would often face divine punishment in the form of lightning strikes. Very few animals survived these lightning strikes, making those capable of assuming human form exceptionally rare. Furthermore, once these animals transformed into human beings, they typically possessed magical powers. They would also condense a tiny bead-like object within their bodies, known as the inner elixir, or Dan. This inner elixir was extremely precious to these beings because it represented the culmination of their many years of spiritual cultivation. They were unwilling to part with their inner elixirs, even at the cost of their lives. If a human were to obtain such an inner elixir, it was believed that it could bring the person back to life or grant them an extended lifespan. In the story we are going to tell today, there is relevant content. The scholar Kong Xueli, a descendant of Confucius, was known for his gentle and reserved nature. He possessed a talent for poetry and was a learned man. Kong Xueli had a like-minded friend who served as the county magistrate in Tiantai County. The friend wrote a letter inviting Kong Xueli to visit him in Tiantai County. However, when Kong Xueli arrived there, he learned that the magistrate had passed away due to illness. Consequently, Kong Xueli found himself stranded in the area. He had spent all his travel funds and couldn't return home. His only option was to reside in the Putuo monastery. The monks at the monastery, aware of his ability to write, hired him to copy scriptures. Heading west from the Putuo monastery, about 100 steps away, lay an official residence owned by a man surnamed Shan, commonly referred to as Mr. Shan. Mr. Shan originally hailed from a wealthy family, but due to a significant legal dispute, his family's fortunes declined. With few remaining family members, Mr. Shan moved to the countryside, leaving his mansion vacant. One day, as snowflakes gently fell from the sky, the road was silent, devoid of any passers-by. Kong Xueli, taking a walk, happened to pass by the front of the Shan family's mansion. He saw a young man emerging from the residence, a youth of exceptional beauty that impressed Kong Xueli greatly. Upon spotting Kong Xueli, the young man approached and greeted him courteously. After a few polite exchanges, he invited Kong Xueli to be his guest at the mansion. Impressed by the young man, Kong Xueli readily accepted the invitation and entered the estate with him. As they stepped into the mansion, Kong Xueli noticed that although the house wasn't overly spacious, it was adorned with silk curtains and decorative hangings. Paintings and calligraphy by ancient scholars adorned the walls. A desk held a book titled Records of the Myriad Wonders of Longhuan, a tome Kong Xueli had never encountered before. He browsed through the book, finding its contents entirely unfamiliar. Believing the young man to be the master of the household, Kong Xueli refrained from inquiring further about him. The young man, displaying compassion for Kong Xueli's circumstances, proposed that he establish a school here to teach students. Kong Xueli sighed and said, "I am a stranger in a foreign land. Who would be willing to recommend me?" The young man responded, "If you don't mind my foolishness, I'd be honored to have you as my teacher." Kong Xueli was delighted by this offer but was hesitant to consider himself a teacher, preferring to be friends with the young man. Kong Xueli then inquired further, asking, "Why has the mansion remained locked for so long?" The young man replied, "This is the Shan family's estate. Initially, when Mr. Shan moved to the countryside, the place was left vacant. My surname is Huangfu, and my family has lived in Shaanxi for generations. However, our ancestral home was destroyed in a wildfire, so we've temporarily taken shelter here." Kong Xueli now realized that Huangfu was not the master of the Shan family's mansion. That evening, they enjoyed each other's company, laughter, and drinks, with Huangfu offering Kong Xueli a place to stay in the mansion. The next morning, just as the day broke, servants entered the room and lit a charcoal fire. Huangfu had already risen and gone to the inner chamber, while Kong Xueli remained seated on the bed, wrapped in his blanket. At that moment, a servant entered and said, "Tai Gong has arrived." Kong Xueli hurriedly got up. He saw an elderly man with snow-white hair walking into the room, expressing his sincere thanks. "I am grateful to you for not despising my mischievous son and agreeing to teach him how to read. The child has just started studying poetry and literature. Please do not treat him as an equal just because you are friends." After his words, the elderly man presented Kong Xueli with a set of silk clothing, a fur hat, a pair of socks, and a pair of shoes. Once Kong Xueli had finished freshening up, they were served food and wine. Kong Xueli noticed that everything in the room, from the furniture to the clothing, was entirely different from what he was accustomed to. Each item gleamed with brilliance. After a few rounds of wine, the elderly man bid farewell, leaning on his cane as he departed. After they finished their meal, Huangfu brought out coursework related to their studies and showed it to Kong Xueli. Seeing that the textbooks were filled with classical Chinese poetry and prose, with no mention of the civil service examinations, Kong Xueli asked why that was. Huangfu smiled and said, "I am studying not to participate in the imperial examinations and gain official titles." In the evening, Huangfu had more wine brought out, saying to Kong Xueli, "Tonight, let us enjoy another round of drinking, but starting tomorrow, we must refrain from drinking." He then instructed his servant, "Go and check if Tai Gong is asleep. If he is, quietly summon Xiangnu to this room." The servant complied. Soon, a pipa, a traditional Chinese musical instrument, wrapped in a brocade bag, was brought in. Afterward, a maid entered the room, beautifully dressed and exceptionally lovely. Huangfu asked her to play the classic tune, Lament of the Noble Consort Xiang, on the pipa. She used an ivory plectrum to pluck the strings, and the room was filled with the enchanting melodies of the ancient music. Kong Xueli had never heard anything like it before. Huangfu had large wine cups brought in, and they continued to drink together, indulging in music and revelry until the early hours of the morning. The next day, they rose early to study. Huangfu was incredibly bright and could remember what he read with ease. After just 2 or 3 months, he was able to compose marvelous poems and prose. They also made a pact to meet every 5 days for wine, always with Xiongnu in attendance. One evening, Kong Xueli, caught up in the excitement of the wine, became somewhat reckless, and his gaze remained fixed on Xiongnu, unwilling to shift away. Huangfu understood his intentions and said to him, "This maid was adopted by my father. You live alone without a wife, and I have been planning this for you day and night for a long time now. I will soon find you a suitable wife." Kong Xueli replied, "If you are kindly arranging a companion for me, she must be someone like Xiongnu." Huangfu chuckled and said, "You really haven't seen much of the world. If you think that would be sufficient, your desires are too easily fulfilled." Another 6 months passed, and Kong Xueli wanted to go out to the suburbs for leisure. He walked to the front gate, but found that both doors were locked from the outside. He asked Huangfu, who replied, "My father is afraid that my social interactions and leisure activities might disturb my temperament, so he employs this method to politely decline other guests." Kong Xueli didn't think much of it and accepted the explanation. It was the height of summer, and the weather was scorching. Kong Xueli and Huangfu moved their study into a pavilion in the garden. One day, a painful swelling the size of a peach suddenly appeared on Kong Xueli's chest. Overnight, the swelling grew as large as a bowl, causing him excruciating pain, and he couldn't stop groaning. Huangfu visited him several times, but he was too distressed to eat or sleep. After a few days, the swelling on Kong Xueli's chest grew even larger, making it impossible for him to eat or drink. The old man Taigong also came to visit him but could only sigh in sympathy with Huangfu. Huangfu said, "2 nights ago, I thought that my sister, Jiao, could cure Mr. Kong's illness. I've already sent someone to my maternal grandfather's house to bring her back, but why hasn't she arrived yet?" Shortly after, a servant came in and reported, "Miss Jiao has arrived, and Aunt and Miss Ah have come along." Huangfu and Taigong immediately got up and went to the inner room. After a while, Huangfu led Jiao to visit Kong Xueli. Jiao was about 13 or 14 years old, with a charming countenance that revealed her intelligence. Her waist was as graceful as a willow. When Kong Xueli saw such a stunning woman, he forgot his pain and groaning, and his spirits improved significantly. Huangfu said to Jiao, "This is my closest friend, even closer than a brother. Please, sister, do your best to treat him." So, Jiao suppressed her shyness, rolled up her sleeves, and approached Kong Xueli's bed to examine him. As she felt his pulse, a fragrance emanated from her body, surpassing even that of orchids. After examining his pulse, Jiao smiled and said to Huangfu, "He was destined to have this illness, but it can still be cured. The pus has already solidified, so it must be surgically removed." After that, she removed a golden bracelet from her arm and placed it on Kong Xueli's afflicted area, gently pressing it down. The swelling from the abscess gradually diminished and was constrained within the bracelet, no longer as large as a bowl. Then, Jiao Na lifted her garment, took out a thin dagger that was thinner than paper, and, with one hand pressing the bracelet, carefully began to cut. Blood of a purple hue began to flow from the wound, staining the bedding. At this moment, Kong Xueli, entranced by Jiao Na's captivating presence, not only didn't feel any pain but also feared that she would finish too quickly, unable to linger by her side. After a short time, the rotting flesh was all removed, leaving a lump resembling a tree knot on a diseased tree. Jiao Na called for water and cleaned the wound. Then, she spat out a red pellet the size of a marble, placed it on Kong Xueli's wound, and spun it around with her fingers. After just one rotation, Kong Xueli felt warmth spreading across his chest. With the second rotation, the wound became slightly itchy. By the third rotation, he felt a refreshing coolness penetrate deep into his bones. Jiao Na put the red pellet back in her mouth and said, "It's done." She quickly left the room. Kong Xueli jumped up and rushed to thank her, feeling as if his severe illness had suddenly disappeared. From that day on, whenever Kong Xueli thought of Jiao Na's beautiful face, he would sit dazed and infatuated. Kong Xueli abandoned his books and spent his days in a daze, seemingly uninterested in anything. Huangfu noticed his state and said to him, "I've searched for a long time and finally found a good companion for you." Kong Xueli asked, "Who is she?" Huangfu replied, "She is also a relative of mine." Kong Xueli contemplated for a long time and said, "No need for that." Then, facing the wall, he recited a poem. Having sailed through the turbulent seas, no other waters seem worthy of attention. Enchanted by the dreamlike clouds and rains of Mount Wu, elsewhere's scenery can hardly be called clouds and rains. Huangfu understood his meaning and said, "My father admires your vast knowledge and talents and often wishes to establish a marital relationship with you. However, I only have a younger sister, who is still very young. My aunt has a daughter named Asong, who is 18 years old and not unattractive. If you don't believe me, Asong will be in the courtyard tomorrow. You can secretly observe from the front room to see for yourself." The next day, Kong Xueli followed Huangfu's instructions and indeed saw Jiao Na accompanied by a beautiful woman. He noticed that the woman had finely arched eyebrows, a small and slender figure, and a countenance that was no less attractive than Jiao Na's. Kong Xueli was overjoyed and asked Huangfu to act as a matchmaker for him. The following day, Huangfu came out of the inner room to congratulate Kong Xueli, saying, "It's done." They prepared another courtyard for Kong Xueli's wedding. That night, drums and music filled the air, and the dust on the rafters was shaken loose and flew everywhere. Kong Xueli, because the woman he had longed for was about to share his bed, even began to doubt whether the palace on the moon, the Guanghan Palace, truly existed in the sky. After the wedding, Kong Xueli was extremely satisfied. One day, Huangfu suddenly said to Kong Xueli, "Being with you and studying together, I've learned a lot of knowledge. I cherish your kindness every day. But recently, the legal case at Mr. Shan's house has been settled, and he is returning soon. Mr. Shan is in a hurry to reclaim his estate, so we are preparing to leave this place and return to the west. Thinking that from now on, it will be difficult for us to meet again, my heart is filled with the sorrow of parting." Kang Xueli expressed his willingness to go with them, but Huangfu advised him to return to his hometown. Kang Xueli felt it would be difficult to return home. Huangfu said, "Don't worry. I can send you back immediately." Not long after, the old man Taigong arrived with Asong and gave Kang Xueli 100 taels of gold. Huangfu held Kang Xueli and his wife with both hands, telling them to close their eyes and not look. Kang Xueli felt himself soaring through the air, with the wind rushing past his ears. After a while, Huangfu said, "We have arrived." Kang Xueli opened his eyes and saw his hometown. Only then did he realize that Huangfu was not an ordinary person. Kang Xueli knocked on the door of his home, and his mother was overjoyed to see him, along with her beautiful daughter-in-law. While the family was celebrating, Kang Xueli turned around and realized that Huangfu had disappeared. Asong served his mother diligently, and her beauty and virtue became well known among the neighbors. Later, Kang Xueli passed the imperial examination and was appointed as the administrative officer of Yan'an Prefecture. He took his family to Yan'an Prefecture, but his mother stayed behind as the journey was too far. Asong gave birth to a son named Little Huan. However, Kang Xueli offended a high-ranking inspector and was removed from his official position. He remained in Yan'an Prefecture awaiting further action and couldn't return to his hometown. One day, while he was hunting in the outskirts, he unexpectedly encountered a handsome young man riding a small black horse, gazing at him. Upon closer inspection, Kang Xueli realized that the young man was none other than Huangfu. They both stopped their horses, gathered together, and their emotions were a mix of joy and sorrow. Huangfu invited Kang Xueli to his place, and they arrived at a village with lush, dense trees that cast a deep shade, even blocking out the sun. Inside Huangfu's home, Kang Xueli noticed that the front gate was adorned with large golden nails, resembling the grandeur of an aristocratic family. When he inquired about Huangfu's sister Jiao Na, he learned that she had already married, and that his mother-in-law had passed away, which filled him with sadness and deep sympathy. Kang Xueli stayed there for one night and departed the next day. Later, he brought his wife and son to reunite with him. Jiao Na also came and playfully teased Kang Xueli's child, saying, "Elder sister has mixed up our lineage." Kang Xueli expressed his gratitude to Jiao Na once again for her past medical treatment. She smiled and said, "Is my brother-in-law still as romantic as before now that you are wealthy and prosperous?" Jiao Na's husband, Mr. Wu, also came to pay his respects. Kang Xueli and his family stayed for 2 nights before leaving. One day, Huangfu approached Kang Xueli with a worried expression and said, "Heaven is about to unleash a great disaster. Can you save us?" Although Kang Xueli did not know what was happening, he immediately agreed. Huangfu hurriedly went outside and called his entire family. They all gathered in the hall and expressed their gratitude to Kang Xueli. Kang Xueli was taken aback and urgently inquired about the situation. Huangfu then explained, "We are not humans. We are foxes. Right now, we are facing a calamity of thunder and lightning. If you are willing to stand up and face this disaster, there is hope for my family to survive. Otherwise, I must ask you to take the child and leave quickly, so you won't be implicated." Kang Xueli swore to stand by their side and face the ordeal together. Huang Fu asked him to hold the sword and stand in front of the main gate, instructing him, "Even if you are struck by thunder and lightning, do not move." Kang Xueli followed Huang Fu's instructions and prepared himself. As expected, he saw dark clouds covering the sky, turning day into night, as if a massive black stone slab had been placed overhead. When he looked back at their original dwelling, he could no longer see the grand houses and deep courtyards. Instead, there stood a large tombstone, and below it, a bottomless abyss. Just as he was filled with astonishment, a sudden thunderbolt resounded from the sky, causing the earth to shake violently. Following that, a fierce wind and torrential rain uprooted ancient trees. Despite feeling bewildered and deafened, Kang Xueli stood firm where he was. Amidst the rolling black smoke, he suddenly saw an evil spirit with a sharp beak and long claws emerge from the abyss, clutching a person and ascending along with the dark smoke. Upon a brief glance at the person's clothing, Kang Xueli suspected it was Jiao Na. He immediately leaped into the air and struck the evil spirit with his sword, causing the captive person to fall from the sky. Suddenly, there was an earth-shattering thunderclap, and Kang Xueli fell to the ground. He had been struck and killed by lightning. After a while, the clouds cleared, and the sun rose. Jiao Na woke up and saw Kang Xueli lying dead beside her. She burst into tears, crying out, "Mr. Kang sacrificed himself to save me, why am I still alive?" At that moment, Asong, too, emerged and helped Jiao Na carry Kang Xueli back home. Jiao Na had Asong cradle Kang Xueli's head and, using a golden hairpin, pried open his teeth. With her fingers holding his cheeks and her tongue, she opened his mouth, placing the red pill inside. Then, mouth to mouth, she blew air into Kang Xueli's mouth. The red pill, carried by the breath, entered Kang Xueli's throat, producing a series of gurgling sounds. After a while, Kang Xueli suddenly opened his eyes, awakening from unconsciousness. Seeing everyone gathered around him, he felt as if he had just woken from a deep dream. The family reunited, turning fear into joy. Kang Xueli believed that the tomb was not a suitable place for a long stay. He discussed with his family about returning to his hometown. Everyone agreed, except for Jiao Na, who remained gloomy. Kang Xueli asked her to accompany Mr. Wu, but she worried about leaving her parents-in-law and her young son. After an entire day of discussion, no decision was reached. Just then, a servant from the Wu family rushed over, his face covered in sweat and panting heavily. Startled, they asked him what had happened, and he explained that the Wu family had also faced a disaster on the same day. Everyone in the Wu family, except for Mr. Wu and Jiao Na, had died. Hearing this news, Jiao Na grieved, beating her chest and wailing while tears poured like rain. After much consolation, they finally decided to go together to Kang Xueli's hometown. After handling some matters in the city for a few days, the Kang family set off overnight. Upon returning to their hometown, Kong Xueli allowed Huangfu's family to stay in his unused garden. Since then, the garden's gate remained locked, only opening when Kong Xueli and Asong visited. Kong Xueli, Huangfu, and Jiao Na frequently spent time in the garden playing chess, drinking wine, chatting, and feasting, just like a family. As little Huan grew older, he became quite handsome and exhibited the clever and lively disposition of a fox. When he roamed the streets, people knew him as the child born to a fox. At the end of the story, the author also has the following commentary. He says, I don't envy Kong Xueli for having such a beautiful wife as Asong, but I envy him for having an intimate female confidant, Jiao Na. Seeing Jiao Na's beauty can make one forget hunger and thirst, and hearing her voice can bring smiles to one's face. Having such a good friend, sitting together to drink and chat, this kind of a spiritual communion, enjoyed in like-mindedness, surpasses the physical love of turning clothes upside down between a man and a woman. Alright. That's all for today's ghostly tale. Jiao Na. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Please also encourage everyone to comment and share more. We'll see you in the next episode.